If you're trying to conceive and feeling overwhelmed with fertility advice, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to Don't Tell Me to Relax, your fertility podcast and antidote to unhelpful fertility information. I'm Hannah, a fertility acupuncturist, teacher and campaigner for better fertility education. This podcast aims to empower and inform you about your menstrual cycle and fertility. It's basically all that information you didn't get in sex ed at school, with the aim of improving your understanding of your reproductive health and optimizing your fertility. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode. Katy is back in front of me and today we can't believe it. We've just been laughing that we have done, I think we've done there must be up to nearly 30 episodes, and we have never done an episode specifically about cervical mucus, which is bizarre because I think it might be the thing that brought us together, Katy.
I think it is. The thing we both speak about the most out of anything maybe ever. And yet.
Yeah. I don't know how we managed to miss that, but I think that given in the Foundations for Fertility, you've just done a whole session on it, and given that you've got a course starting next month all about it, we thought that it would be a really good time to do a whole episode about tracking cervical mucus, what cervical mucus is, what to look out for, how to understand it, all of that shizzle would be a good episode to do, because we do get a lot of questions. And I don't know about you, but if I had £1 for every single person that ever came into clinic and said to me, I always wondered what that was, I never knew that when I was a teenager, I used to get loads of it, I was really embarrassed. In fact, someone said that to me today, I used to get it loads when I was a teenager, I was really embarrassed, I didn't understand it. I mean, if I had £1, I'd be like, I don't know, living in farmers.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's just one of those topics that once it's explained to you, it's like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense. And yet it's this thing that most of us don't know about until you're having to look into your fertility in some respect. And otherwise you think there's something wrong with you, and it's like, no, it's good, it's great.
Yeah. I wish they did. I know we say this all the time, but it would have been a good thing to know at school, wouldn't it? A really good thing to know at school, because it really would have helped you understand. I mean, obviously, I'm not suggesting that anyone uses it as a method to know, to avoid pregnancy by any explanation, but just to understand your cycle, it would be really helpful. So, Katy, take us to the beginning. Let's start at the beginning. What is cervical mucus?
Okay, so cervical mucus, I'm going to start off by saying it's a sign that your hormones are happy and everything's kind of ticking along as we want it to be. It's a real sign that you're healthy. You make cervical mucus in that first half of your menstrual cycle. And as estrogen levels start to rise, your cervix has these little crypts inside them, and they start to make this cervical mucus, cervical fluid, like those names are kind of interchangeable. And it's there. We use it as a sign to kind of say that ovulation is approaching, because we're kind of seeing those estrogen level rise. It's this fertile fluid. It tells you you're in that fertile part of your cycle, and it does all sorts of magical things that make conception far more achievable, because it keeps your sperm alive inside of you, versus if you had the 1 day of ovulation, because that egg only survives 12 to 24 hours. Imagine if you only had that amount of time to try and conceive. So there's loads of other things that it does that I'm sure we're going to get into, but it's this magical fluid that it can tell you so much about what's going on with your cycle.
And so in terms of its functions in conception, so why is it important? Because what does it actually do to aid your fertility, other than obviously helping you understand that your body's getting ready to conceive? What are the other reasons that you have it?
So some of the kind of big reasons when we're thinking particularly in relation to conceiving and fertility related stuff is so sperm can stay alive inside cervical mucus for up to 5 days. So it's the same kind of pH balance as seminal fluid. So during the rest of your menstrual cycle, your vagina is actually a very, very acidic environment. And then as you move into that fertile part of the cycle, the pH balance changes and it's about the same kind of balance as seminal fluid, so the sperm can survive. So that means that you don't have to wait until the day of ovulation in order to try and conceive. You can be trying to conceive basically when you start to see mucus, like that's your prime opportunity to start trying, because it's going to help to nourish that sperm, keep it alive, keep it happy. It also, in terms of its like structure, when we have that fertile, stretchy mucus, it kind of creates these little almost motorways for sperm to like move through. It helps transport the sperm up to the egg in the fallopian tube. Whereas after you ovulate, a different type of mucus forms, a mucus plug forms. Now, we don't generally see the mucus plug, but it's much thicker and sperm literally can't get through that. So the quality of it will depend on how easily sperm can move through the type of mucus that your body's creating, depending on where you are in your cycle. And the other thing that I find fascinating is there are like little structures inside the cervical mucus that can block poor quality sperm. So only the best quality sperm are going to be getting through up to the egg with the potential to fertilize it. So these little structures that literally lock onto the top of the sperm that maybe aren't of like the best shape, they're not the best swimmers, and your body recognizes that and is able to kind of go, nah, like it's like you're not getting into the club because you're not cool enough, kind of thing. So yeah, there's some like your kind of key fertility reasons why it's really important to understand it and all the good stuff it's doing for you as well.
And that is really amazing, isn't it? This idea that it kind of nourishes the sperm and gets rid of the bad stuff is like, it's a bit mind-blowing, really.
Yeah,
isn't it?
like I think the fact that your body can recognize what's like top notch,
yeah,
and like accept or deny them is just like, you don't even know that's happening. Like it's just doing it. It's
just going around having a cup of tea, and your cervical mucus is there sorting out the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, it's clever stuff.
And I'm right in saying, aren't I? Or I think I'm right in saying that it's actually it's better to have sperm waiting for when the egg is released, rather than wait till that egg is released and then try and catch the egg once the egg has been released with the sperm. Because as you said just earlier on, that the minute that egg is released from the follicle, it starts to deteriorate in quality. So you want the sperm waiting ready for the moment that egg is released to maximize your chances of conception. Is that right? I mean, I don't know how they know that, but
that's my understanding as well. Like it's best to kind of have it there, like ready and waiting. And that's why I'm so keen for people to understand their mucus versus like waiting on ovulation strips, because you're likely to be seeing mucus for a longer for more days than you would be getting like positives on that ovulation predictor kit strip. So yeah, I'm always keen for people to understand, go for mucus first, because it just buys you more time, basically.
Exactly. And the thing is, isn't it, I think, I can't remember which report I was reading it on, but one of the main reasons, and this is assuming there's no underlying condition.
Yes.
Okay, so no gynecological condition. But one of the main reasons that it might be taking longer to conceive is that people don't have enough sex. And they have done studies that when you wait for OPKs, so let's say you're waiting till you get that positive on your OPK before you start having sex, understandably, because obviously we know that when you're trying to conceive, sex suddenly becomes a right pain in the backside. So, therefore, if you're waiting for your ovulation predictor kit, you're having less sex. Whereas if you're waiting for cervical mucus, which is often before you start to get the signs before you get the LH surged and the positive on an ovulation predictor kit, you are therefore having more sex, which therefore is increasing your chances of conception.
Yeah, 100%. I think if anyone's kind of unfamiliar with how the ovulation strips work, it's like you pee on a strip and it's measuring for this hormone LH that Hannah just mentioned. There we go. And so what's kind of happening in your menstrual cycle is the estrogen levels rise, and the estrogen has to get to a certain point, and then you get this surge of this luteinizing hormone. You should just get that one surge in your menstrual cycle, and that triggers ovulation to happen. when you get that surge, so it's like that's the hormone the strip's measuring, there's like 24 to 36 hour window typically until ovulation happens. So you're kind of maybe only giving yourself like a day or two to try to have sex and have an opportunity of trying to conceive. Whereas your mucus, you might be seeing mucus for a week before you ovulate. So that's kind of a difference in the timeline. So understanding your mucus first, and if you still want to use the OPKs, then like the predictor kits, then go for it. But just make sure you understand your mucus first, because also you'll probably save money on the strips if you just start to use them when you start to see mucus versus just using them all the time.
That's a really good point, yeah. And so in terms of like an average cycle, a typical cycle, which we know obviously we're going to, put in inverted commas, there is no such thing as a typical cycle. We are all individuals and beautiful ones at that. But there is a general sort of pattern of what people should see for cervical mucus. Can you explain a little bit about a sort of average normal cycle?
Yeah. So typically you'll have your period. So there's going to be you'll have your period, and there'll be between sort of like 4 to 7 days of bleeding. Then for most people, after they've had their bleed and that's finished, come to a clear end, you'll have a few days in your cycle where you're probably feeling like dry as such. You're not really seeing any mucus. And when I say like seeing mucus, I'm talking about checking when you're like wiping. I don't teach my clients to do any internal checking or anything. It's just a case of when you wipe, when you go to the toilet, have a look what's on the paper, see what's there. So usually for most people, they'll start to see mucus between like 5 and 7 days before they start to ovulate. Again, this is in a typical kind of healthy cycle. For some people, it may be less, but it is usually 5 to 7 days before you ovulate. So if we're imagining, say, we're doing a quote unquote textbook cycle where ovulation's happening on day 14, you might start to see mucus from like day 7 to 9 onwards, kind of thing. Then once ovulation's happened, progesterone will kick in, that hormone that's dominant in the second part of the menstrual cycle, and progesterone will cause your cervical mucus to dry up. So you won't be seeing mucus after you wipe when you go to the toilet, and that should be dry until, your vagina is gonna always be producing some kind of fluid or discharge. It's a self-cleaning organ. So I also teach my clients how to differentiate between kind of just vaginal discharge versus cervical fluid. So that's one thing to be able to make the distinction with. But once you move into that second half of the cycle, post-ovulation, you should be dry and not be seeing any cervical fluid.
Great. And can you tell us, because it's always asked, you see these kind of charts, and I've got them myself, around the different type of mucus. So you see this kind of, is it non-peak and peak mucus?
Yeah.
So tell us what that is all about.
Okay. So firstly, non-peak and peak mucus are both fertile types of mucus. I actually really don't like them as names because I think non-peak makes it sound like it's not fertile, but actually if it's got peak in it, whether it's peak or non-peak, it's fertile. So just that's a really key point to remember. So we see non-peak mucus. So non-peak mucus is that's more kind of lotiony, sticky in its texture. It's got a little bit of stretch to it, but it's not like that kind of classic egg white cervical mucus everyone talks about on Instagram. Whereas peak mucus is that egg white, slippery. So when you wipe, it's got that like slip and slide sensation. Like you probably really recognize that feeling of like, whoa, okay, there's something slippery going on down there. And that's your peak mucus. So if it's clear, if it really stretches between your fingers quite a lot, that is peak mucus. One of the key differences between peak and non-peak mucus is we tend to see peak mucus, that clear, stretchy, lubricative fluid, in response to higher levels of estrogen. So it's likely you'll be seeing peak mucus closer to ovulation. However, some people may not ever see peak mucus, but if you're still seeing that kind of lotiony, creamy, sticky mucus before you've ovulated, that is fertile. So that is still an opportunity to try if you're seeing that.
Yeah. And what you just saying then was reminding me about clients with polycystic ovaries, for example. So if you have longer cycles, or you have like irregular cycles, then using cervical mucus as a sign that you are potentially fertile, whether it's, peak or non-peak, is always going to be the best way to make sure you are covering all your bases for that cycle, because you can still conceive with polycystic ovaries. It just is harder. It can be harder because your ovulation can be irregular, and you might start to have cervical mucus, then it might stop, then you might start to have it again and it might stop. But as long as you know to have sex at that point, and when it's there, then you're kind of giving yourself the best possible chance you can do at any one given cycle, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think as well with PCOS or these like long irregular cycles where you can see kind of multiple patches of mucus, it's not as clear as that kind of more textbook example I gave earlier.
Yeah.
And that's where also doing basal body temperature can be a really useful tool, because then that allows, gosh, I can't speak today. It allows you to look back and understand when ovulation did happen. So you've kind of had all those opportunities to try, and like you may not know until like later down the line, if you have another patch of mucus, that wasn't when ovulation happened. Whereas when you're using basal body temperature and the temperature goes up, then you know, okay, well, that was the time where we may have conceived. And then going forward, if you do want to have any sex, that should just be about pleasure, and it's not a case of like, oh, okay, we need to try kind of thing.
Yeah. And so we have lots and lots of people in clinic who have issues around, well, two issues that we see. One is around being able to find it, and two is around having it at all. So when it comes to finding it, because I think lots of people say, oh, I don't have any, and I'm like, well, is it that you don't have any, or is it that you can't find it? So let's cover that base first. How is the best way to find it? Like, what is your kind of top tips?
The way I teach people to find it is just through checking every time you go to the toilet. So, sorry, there's builders next door and the clanging is evident, but we'll keep going. So the way I teach clients to find it is you get some toilet paper, make sure it's nice and flat, and you're going to wipe across your vulva. So remember, we talked about this before, vulva outside, vagina inside. And so wiping across your vulva, like from front to back, and look at the toilet paper and see if there's anything on there. So I get my clients to try and do this every single time they go to the toilet, and before and after they go to the toilet. Sometimes it's that you might have some kind of there ready and waiting, so you want to try and wipe before you go to the toilet so you can catch it and observe it. And then other times it may be once you've used your pelvic muscles to pee or poo, that you kind of force some of that mucus down, and then you see more of it on like the second wipe. So when I'm teaching clients, and when they get into the habit of doing it, they are checking very frequently. Basically every time your trousers are down and you're wiping before and after going to the toilet, which if you think about it, is going to be multiple times a day. So you're really getting into this habit of trying to look for it and observe it. So the more frequently you're doing it, and then you know what you're looking for, then it's kind of like, okay, maybe I just didn't know what I was looking for. I was missing it because it was going down the toilet. Or is it that you're not seeing it at all? So I would say getting used to just making a habit of checking when you wipe is going to be one of the best ways to get a distinction on what your mucus looks like and if you're having it at all.
And lots of people, once we start working with them in clinic, say, oh, yes, I get it. Like, I never knew it. And then, once you tune into it, it's always amazing, isn't it? I was having this conversation with someone in clinic today that, when you start trying to conceive, you suddenly notice all these things that have probably been there for months and you never realize, like spotting or discharge, or, once you tune into it, you'll be amazed at what you can find. But if you're not tuned into it, it's amazing how it just passes you by, because
totally
about, I don't know, what we're going to wear, or, what's for tea, all that kind of stuff, whatever, that's where my brain goes. That it is easy to miss and not see it.
Yeah, 100%.
So if people are trying to track and they are tuning into it and they can't find it, or they find very, very little of it, why might that be? Why might you be having problems with it?
There's a few reasons that can go on. So some of the kind of like the basic reasons are people are just not eating enough, or their nutrition's off in some respect. We always talk about protein and things, but making sure that you've got a really well-rounded, well-balanced diet, and listening to any of the episodes we've got on nutrition will be a good place to start there. So I always check in with that first. What other things are there? So folate, which folic acid is like the synthetic form of folate, so that's in a lot of the prenatal supplements. I think it's in virtually all of them. And folate's really essential when it comes to cervical mucus production. So if you're deficient in that in some respect, then you may be making very little mucus. If your hormones are a bit off in some respect, because it's in response to those rising levels of estrogen, so if there's any issue with the hormone production itself, then perhaps that's what's going on there. What other reasons are there? If you've recently had a procedure on your cervix, so if you've had any kind of abnormal cells removed with like the loop or the Leitz procedures, that can sometimes cause temporary or permanent damage to the cervical crypts. So it may be that you don't see it for a while, and it takes some time to recover. And then the other reason I would tend to say, where people can sometimes not be seeing it, is after you may have had a round of IVF or something that didn't work, and you were then trying to conceive again. Drugs like Clomid and letrozole change how we interpret estrogen in the body. So then for the few cycles afterwards, it can be you actually produce less cervical mucus. And then one of the big ones that Hannah did just have to remind me of by writing it up on a piece of paper is the pill. So the pill can really, really change. So the cervical crypts, actually, where the mucus is made, it can change the quality of the mucus they produce. So, and also the pill can change how you use certain nutrients and things. So you can be deficient from a nutritional, like a vitamin kind of aspect. Post pill. So you want to make sure, again, that all those kind of like foundational factors are really, really strong, but knowing that the pill can have a really big impact on your hormone levels and then also the actual production of the mucus as well.
Yeah, and that can recover, can't it? Because we see that a lot, in that people often come when their cycles are irregular post pill, and as their cycles settle down, they do start to notice that the cervical mucus comes back, and that is a really good sign, isn't it? That your health is getting better, that your cycle, that your hormones are more balanced. It's like a really good symbol of good menstrual cycle health, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And I also had a client who was really struggling with cervical mucus. She was in my last group, and she quit smoking during the process of the course, and like did a really, like, went cold turkey, really, really went for it, and cervical mucus improved quite a lot.
And so what can people do? You know, I guess we've really covered that in terms of like supporting their cycle to support their cervical mucus is around good nutrition, good sleep, exercise, you know, all the things that help balance your hormones. There's often quite a lot of stuff around, like you mentioned folate there, but there's often stuff around evening primrose oil, vitamin E. People often come into clinic and ask me about that. Any kind of thoughts on specific supplements for cervical mucus?
I think the folate one is the one that I'm most aware of. I'm not sure about evening primrose oil and stuff. No, vitamin E is one I think that they look at for like PMS and progesterone support. But I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest with you. That's one for Kirsty.
Yeah, no, I'm never sure either. And that's what I always say, is kind of like, I don't think it's as straightforward as taking, I don't know, and that's going to improve your cervical mucus. I think you have to go a bit wider, don't you, and look at general health, and then have to think about, you know, all the areas that you can control and make improvements as part of supporting that cervical mucus, rather than focus in on that cervical mucus, that one thing, and what's the one supplement that's going to work. I think it's kind of take a step back and look at everything that we know helps improve your health and cycle, and that then in turn will improve your cervical mucus.
Yeah, 100%. I think it is really taking that kind of holistic approach where we're looking at you as a whole and what's going on with your health and just making sure everything's in check, all the kind of typical things that we talk about. One other thing that I think is maybe worth mentioning is the amount of cervical mucus you can expect to see, because I know I've been guilty of getting on Instagram and literally cracking an egg and playing with that between your fingers. And I think sometimes people worry that like that's the amount they're meant to see. And actually, in a kind of that healthy, fertile, optimal cycle, but seeing between like a quarter to a teaspoon a day is quite normal. So it's maybe nowhere near the amount you're thinking, and just knowing that, yes, like a quarter to a teaspoon, like just visually trying to imagine that it's not necessarily loads, but that's would be plenty if you were seeing it.
The other thing that people, just thinking about that, the other thing that people say a lot, and which is good to remember, is that if you are having sex through your fertile window, that sometimes it can be hard to distinguish between semen and cervical mucus, because everything kind of gets a bit mixed up together. So people often say that, and I think that can be a problem. And I think it is quite hard to work out what's what when you are having regular sex through your window as well. But I guess it's like looking at that beginning phase, maybe if you're not having sex, of noticing that change. So you're seeing that your body is kind of increasing its estrogen and switching to that more fertile place.
Yeah, something you can do that can help to create less confusion between some of those observations is, so after you've had sex, and say it was a time where you were like trying to conceive, so like unprotected sex, wait for like half an hour, and then you can do something called the semen elimination technique. Which is basically going to the toilet, getting a piece of toilet paper, you pee, you stop the pee, and you wipe, and you repeat that process until you can kind of, I say feel, I don't know, I don't sleep with men, so I'm just doing what the textbook tells me. But until you can feel it's kind of gone, or there's no more coming out when you're peeing and stuff, and like that's kind of stopped, and then that can help you to kind of be like, okay, like I've kind of, the whole what goes up must come down situation has tried to like resolved it a bit more, versus you going to the toilet later and being like, oh, I don't know what that is. So
And so what about cervical mucus? Or seeing mucus or discharge at other points in your cycle. So let's say, in theory, once you've ovulated, your body stops producing that fertile mucus. As you said, it produces that more sticky G-type mucus, which you shouldn't see. So really, tell us about that luteal phase. What do we want in terms of cervical mucus in that luteal phase? So that phase when after you've ovulated.
So in that ideal cycle, progesterone kicks in and you make that. So Hannah said G-type mucus. So G-type is gestogenic. So under the influence of progesterone, a different type of mucus is made, and it forms a plug in the cervix, which means sperm can't get through. So when you're in that second half of the cycle and you're wiping and you're checking, it may be that there's something on the toilet paper that just looks a little bit like, almost like someone's wiped a Pritt stick across it. And now that's vaginal cell slough. So this is your vagina just doing that self-cleaning. It's a good thing to be seeing. That's kind of typical of what you may expect to see in the luteal phase. So that kind of dry, you're not getting that slip and slide kind of sensation. So that's quite typical. But what sometimes can happen is people see something that looks like that non-peak mucus in the luteal phase. So the non-peak being the kind of lotion-like, creamy, a little bit sticky. And that is when perhaps progesterone isn't as high as we want it to be. So we're getting less of that plug forming and more kind of mucus kind of coming through. So if you are seeing that non-peak mucus in the luteal phase, that can be an indicator that there's progesterone maybe isn't quite where we want it to be. Now, that's not to say that pregnancy couldn't occur. Pregnancy can occur in any cycle, provided ovulations happen. Like, that is the key thing. But obviously, we're always educating you on how to, like, ideally where you want your cycle to be and getting all the foundations in place so you're not seeing mucus coming through in that second part of the cycle.
And just following on from that, I'm just thinking with my Vagiversity vagina, I think that, you know, from my learnings, understanding vaginal health from a sort of infection, sort of microbiome view, obviously at any point during your cycle, you might notice unusual discharge. But I would say that the key times are around ovulation, when estrogen is high. It's most common that you might experience thrush. So you might experience like a yellowy discharge, cottage cheese like discharge with an itch. That's most common then. And then I would say PV is very common during the premenstrual phase. So probably from about 7 days before your period, when your hormones are dropping, that is when that drop in hormones makes your vagina more vulnerable to sort of bugs and to the sort of bacteria to kind of overgrow from the good bacteria. So, and symptoms could be like a watery discharge, a grey discharge. You're always looking for that sort of fishy smell, any kind of irritation, anything unusual. Any unusual discharge other than what we've said today is something to always investigate and look out for. And the other time I'm going to flag is after sex. So if you notice any irritation, discomfort, unusual discharge, smell, then again, after sex is not usual and it always needs to be investigated. So that's kind of like where checking your mucus for the good fertile stuff and the stuff that could be a sign of imbalance, it's really important to kind of have that knowledge so you know you can get it investigated should you need to. So, Katy, if people want to learn more about this, because the thing is that it's not easy and it can get stressful and it can make you feel more anxious. And so, the work that you do in teaching and running your courses is great, because this is the stuff that, as we always say, hasn't been taught in school. So tell us a little bit about your course that you've got coming up and what's involved in that.
So yeah, I've got a course starting next Wednesday, if you're listening when this comes out. And so the course is called Conceive, so aiming at anyone who is trying to conceive in the next 18 months or so. And it's all about you getting that real understanding of using fertility awareness to understand when your fertile window is, but also to be able to use your menstrual cycle as a diagnostic tool. So the first kind of chart that I get from you is like our baseline. It's like where we're starting, so we can look at your cycle and be like, okay, maybe maybe you aren't seeing mucus. What are we going to do to change that and optimize your chances of conception? So you learn how to use fertility awareness, but there's also this like mentoring aspect of being like, okay, 1 week we're going to be looking at egg quality, another week we're going to be looking at nutrition. Like there's all sorts of different elements that I'm going to be bringing in to give you the best support whilst you're trying to conceive, but also that kind of keeping you sane in the process, hopefully, and like really giving you different tools and things like manage the 2-week wait. How can we improve your PMS if that's like you're doing the kind of symptom spotting versus is it just PMS, and like what can we do to really help you get through this in the best way. So yeah, I've got a few spaces left, and I really want to share this information with as many people as possible. And like previous clients have found, having those kind of regular check-ins and that accountability, the support, being in a group of people going through the same stuff, just to feel like less alone in it. Because for so many people, when they're trying to conceive, it's such a private affair. Like it's often just between you and your partner, and that can feel really hard. So just being able to talk about it at all for a lot of people is just really refreshing. So having that support in amongst it, and I feel like the sessions are really informative, but also like this podcast, like we keep it really like fun, and like there's just giving you all the information, and like people get really into it once they start. So you'll be as obsessed with mucus as me.
Also, being at the other end of the spectrum where my cycle is going, I would say it is really good for just knowing your health in general, knowing your vaginal health, your cycle, all of this stuff at any point in your life at which you learn it. It does stay with you, in the future, and it is helpful. So
yeah, I always say that like it's a skill for life. And I mean, as I said, like I don't sleep with men. I have a girlfriend. Like I'm not trying to conceive. I haven't tried to conceive. So, that's an element of it that maybe like I don't fully understand, but I know the power of understanding your cycle, understanding how that's actually impacting you. And because I was at quite the like extreme end of that spectrum of how my cycle was impacting me. and like seeing it in black and white, well, actually blue and white because of the app that we use, but seeing it there, being like, oh, like this is why it's impacting you. And then from now on being able to track my cycles in that way, and if ever that kind of goes a little bit off, I'm like, okay, like what do I need to do? And like you just have that for life, and like no one can take that away from you. It is honestly invaluable, this stuff.
Absolutely. So I will put all the details on the show notes at the end. So if anyone's interested, then they can contact Katy directly. We're also still running Foundations for Fertility. And if you're listening to this on catch up and you've missed it, then you can register and sign up for all 5 lessons, which is kind of a summary really of all the information about understanding your fertility, optimizing your health for you to support your fertility, tests and checks, and how to look after yourself. That's all going to be there as well for everybody to access, completely free. So thank you as always, Katy. I hope your builders aren't there for too much longer.
I think we've got a little while yet. They've gutted the house. So.
Well, it's lovely to see you, and thanks everybody for listening. I hope you found it helpful as always, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Katy.
Thanks, Hannah.
If you've enjoyed listening to this and want to find out more, then come and join my free community in Facebook. We have loads of resources. You can catch up on all our previous webinars and be the first to know about forthcoming events. To sign up, just follow the link in the show notes. And if you'd like to work one-to-one with myself or one of the team, then please see our website, hannahpern.com, where you can book in directly or organise a discovery call to find out how we can support your fertility and your reproductive health.